And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather for Tuesday morning. IFR covering the Bering Sea, the Aleutians right into the western Alaska Peninsula, Togiak Bay up over the western Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and across Norton Sound there to Nome. Otherwise improving as you head east, becoming VFR over the interior eastward to the border, with marginal VFR central western Alaska Range, Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, IFR Kodiak Island, and marginal VFR along the North Gulf Coast and down along the coast of the Panhandle. For the afternoon, marginal VFR increases over the northern southeast coast, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay areas, and spreads into the southern Copper River Basin, Prince William Sound, areas of south central Alaska, and Kodiak Island marginal. IFR, western Brooks Range out to the northwest coast, and a little bit of IFR here for the eastern Arctic coast. And still a lot of IFR out over the Bering Sea down to the Aleutians into the western Alaska Peninsula. And for Wednesday morning, IFR right up across Cape Newinam into the Auckland Mountains and up along the southwest coast, Nunivak Island area, of course, with Pribilofs. And the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians stay in the IFR and into the Alaska Peninsula. Marginal VFR here across southern Alaska and into the Panhandle. Marginal VFR with IFR now up in the north there. Stays VFR central eastern interior of Alaska, as well as the north slope out to the Arctic coast, looking pretty good. And that holds through Wednesday afternoon. VFR for the Arctic coast, right on down south of the Alaska Range here into the Kenai Peninsula, northern Cook Inlet, all VFR. Marginal VFR here, North Gulf Coast from Bristol Bay eastward across the Gulf of Alaska. IFR right around Yakutat and the extreme northern Panhandle. And IFR now backing off a little bit here, still covering the area from about Nikolsky westward to the Komodorskis. Pribilofs becoming marginal VFR, with marginal VFR into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, Bristol Bay, western Cook Inlet and the Alaska Range here. And for passes tomorrow, Anatuvik and Adigan, both look marginal, as does Lake Clark and Merrow, occasional marginal VFR for those two passes, rainy as well. Windy, marginal VFR, that'll be mainly on the southern entrance, VFR out the north side, and Isabella Mentasta going VFR for the day on Tuesday. Tanita, occasionally marginal, mostly marginal for Portage, and Chilkoot and White now for a change, looking at marginal VFR conditions. Freezing levels here, about anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 feet over the northern part of the state, roughly 8,000 feet here in the south, and then running from about 10,000 to 12,000 feet over the southeast coast, and 12,000 feet or so for the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And from there, taking a look at the icing graphic, pretty good area here of icing coming into the central interior all the way down across Togiak, Dillingham, and the Alaska Peninsula. Could be some considerable moderate rime icing in this zone tomorrow. And then another area of coming into the western Aleutians out there with another system. Otherwise, southeast coast, just a threat of some isolated moderate mixed or rime icing there over the southern Panhandle. And for the jet stream, that area coming into the Panhandle on southerly winds there across the entire area, but most of the moisture staying down to the south associated with this low, spinning south of the Gulf of Alaska. Westerly flow at about 65 knots here at 33,000 feet in the central interior, but stronger out here. Looks like northwest winds about 110 knots there over the southern Bering Sea. 9,000 feet, north to northwest winds, 40 to 50 knots, southern Bering Sea into the Aleutians. And southwest flow here, 35 to 40 knots across the central interior of the state, south 35 knots for the western Arctic coast. And over the Gulf of Alaska, increasing southerly flow here, looking at 45 knots, pushing in toward the southeast coastal areas, much lighter here for the North Gulf Coast. And for 3,000 feet, narrow band of 25 knot southeast winds here along the North Gulf Coast, 30 to 35 knot south-southwesterlies over the southwest interior, east 25 for the central Arctic coast, and strongest winds out here over the western Aleutians from the northwest or west-northwest at about 45 knots. Turbulence-wise, with those stronger winds, occasional moderate chop, shimmying at 2 to about Amchitka Island. And moderate turbulence also here in the shaded area along the Yukon River into the Kuskokwim Valley and, of course, the Kuskokwim Mountains on down to just north of Togiak and Dillingham.